In the summer of 1914, Wilhelm was 26 years old, newly married, and employed as a teacher in a village in west-central Germany. Unlike most German men his age, Wilhelm had not been called up for compulsory military service, but was nevertheless one of the 3 million men that made up Germany's reserves. For Wilhelm, 1914 was set to be a year like any other. But the murder of one man 1,000 miles away was about to change everything. Typing up his diary entries years later, he recalled,
"Heir to the throne assassinated. Ultimatum. Danger of war. These are the main topics of conversation. Watch out, there's sure to be war soon, an old crone tells me. I recently passed a plot of land that was completely covered in bright red fire flowers, which means blood will flow." People get more and more excited when the laborers' trains arrive from Frankfurt in the evening to find out from a reliable source what has been announced on broadsheets. The local bailiff comes along with a strange big drum instead of the usual bell. Most people have never seen this drum before. He stops in front of our gate. War declaration and mobilization.
On the 4th of August, German troops began their push into neutral Belgium, violating the country's independence. In response, Britain, compelled by the Treaty of London, declared war on Germany. In the first few days after Germany's declaration of war, millions of men were mobilized. Among them was Wilhelm, who answered the call to duty on the 7th of August.
For us younger people who only know the war from books, an interesting time seems to be dawning. But now it's time to get the mobilization order. Our neighbor has to report for duty on the first day of mobilization. Every day others follow, and more gaps appear in the families. Our house is also about to be mobilized. The eldest has to report to the artillery in Darmstadt on the 3rd mobilization day. On the 6th mobilization day, the 2nd follows as a substitute reservist with Infanterieregiment number 115 in Darmstadt. On the 7th mobilization day, it is my turn, and as an Ersatzreservist, I am called up to Darmstadt to be assigned to the Mainz governorate. So, in a week, the house is empty.
In mid-August, in response to Germany's push into Belgium, the French launched an attack on the German territory of Alsace-Lorraine. In the ensuing battle, the French were repelled, and elsewhere German troops defeated British expeditionary forces at the Battle of Mons. In the face of heavy losses, German forces were making good progress, and by the end of the month had reached the Marne, just 60 kilometers from Paris. Despite these early victories, German forces were not able to achieve a decisive victory, and their advance was halted. Still in Germany, Wilhelm could only watch on, but on the 16th of September, he was declared fit for frontline service.
On the 16th of September, we were mustered. Georg Haller, fit for garrison service. Paul Sommerlath, fit for frontline service. Me, fit for frontline service. Jost, fit for garrison service. Spatz, fit for garrison service. Helmut Haller, fit for garrison service. Wirst, unfit for service. In the afternoon, the 26-year-olds were pulled out of the regiment and put in a separate lineup. We were gradually introduced to military customs with drill, instructions, roll call, and so on.
By December, after 2 months' training, Wilhelm was deemed combat ready. He was going to war.
"20th of December, we received live cartridges. At 10:15 a.m., we are ordered to march to the railway station, where we leave for the front at 12 noon. Via Griesheim to Worms, where we have coffee and refreshments. Then our train is attached to a transport of the 81st, and we continue to Ludwigshafen via Speyer to Germersheim, where we are given a hearty meal of rice soup and large quantities of meat.
As Wilhelm and his comrades made the long journey towards the front, they were soon confronted by the harsh realities of war. It was to be the first of many encounters with death, a grim foreshadowing of the horrors to come.
Before Schirmeck, we come across the first soldier's grave, where 2 comrades are resting. A simple cross commemorates the 2 warriors. At around 3:30 a.m., we land at the terminus at Bourg-Bruges. We spend the next few hours on the train until 7 a.m. As the railway guard tells us, we are only 3 hours from the French front.
On the 22nd of December, Wilhelm was ordered to report to Lubin, a village in the Vosges, the only mountain range on the Western Front. It's here, on the rocky mountaintops and in the dark forest, that Wilhelm would get his first real experiences of the war.
On Tuesday, the 22nd of December 1914, I have to report to Lubin at 9 a.m., and then the allocation to the platoon and corporalship follows. Here I find quite comfortable quarters together with my compatriots. We are kept on the move every evening with entrenching work until our 1st battalion has moved into its section here. Since our company is not there yet, we as a leaderless herd don't see much of Christmas Eve. The serving of grog evokes something of a festive mood. During the night, we move on to the entrenchments again. Finally, our 1st battalion is in the area, and we are also distributed to the individual companies.
For Wilhelm and his fellow recruits, that first Christmas at the front was a subdued affair. But as the new year approached, he found himself manning a listening post, a dangerous position just a few meters from the French trenches.
31st of December 1914. Together with 6 men, I am at the Fichtenwald listening post, a listening post in front of the main position. 2 men are standing watch, 4 men are resting in the dugout. A hole in the ground with a few spruce poles, the walls sealed with gauze, a straw bed on the floor. A candle on a wooden stick in the wall illuminates this cave. Eating, writing letters, and so forth, as long as you're not on sentry duty. Just like at home, you often check your watch. Some people can't wait, and our shouts of Frohes Neues Jahr begin a few minutes before midnight. The Frenchie was very surprised and probably interpreted them as a war cry, because he opened a withering fire. After burning through a lot of ammunition, he calmed down again, and at 1 a.m. his Bonne Année could be heard echoing through the night.
As 1915 dawned, Wilhelm and his fellow soldiers found themselves on the front line near Bassy-Merlus, still facing the French. Life in the trenches could be monotonous. To pass the time, many German soldiers brought with them personal items such as games, sketchbooks, and even cameras. Wilhelm was one of them. Encouraged to take pictures by High Command, his photos provide a unique snapshot of everyday life during the early stages of the war, capturing scenes of destruction and intimate moments of friendships forged on the front lines.
January 3rd, 1915. French shrapnel has been making our trench duty more unpleasant for a few days now. In my free time, I take a little walk around the posture to the 3rd Battalion to visit some old acquaintances. Here, the German and French trench sentry posts are less than 10 meters apart in places. Thick steel screens with a loophole mark the respective position of the sentry. I observe an interesting spectacle from such a concealed firing slit. From time to time, a French trench sentry puts his rifle to his shoulder, fires a shot into the air, ducks down again, reappears at another point and fires another shot. At another place, the German and French sentry throw stones at each other. Another Frenchman throws a loaf of white bread over. They shout all sorts of remarks at each other. I would have liked to watch for a while longer, but I have to get back to my company.
Within a matter of months, the war on the Western Front had devolved into stalemate. Both sides were dug in, and combat was largely limited to sniper fire, artillery exchanges, and small-scale raids. But behind the scenes, discontented generals, unhappy with the direction the war was taking, were busy planning. The consequences of their plans would soon be felt by the millions of men stationed along the front. But for now, Wilhelm and his men were given the day off to celebrate their monarch's birthday.
Kaiser's birthday celebration on the 27th of January. No work duty, only a field service, during which the church bells, those of Bas Merlus, are heard again for the first time. Speech by the regimental commander.
In the dense forests of the Vosges, where Wilhelm now found himself, the threat of sudden attack was ever present. With both sides poised to strike at any moment, there was little time for anything but the preparation of defenses. When not carrying out maintenance duties, it was the job of men like Wilhelm to prepare improvised weapons, including hand bombs made from tin cans and nails.
On the 13th of February 1915, Ulm pioneers were assigned to us to improve the position and drive saps up the Schusterberg. Now it was time to haul logs up to the heights and prepare assault trenches. 12 men each from the 2nd and 4th companies were trained on the Minenwerfer. A large number of hand bombs are prepared. These are tin cans filled with nails, pieces of wire, gunpowder and the like, tied at the top with a piece of cloth from which a piece of fuse sticks out.
On the 17th of February, Wilhelm, now an Unteroffizier, and his unit were abruptly ordered to staging posts behind the front lines. There, they received the news that they would be launching an assault on French positions the very next morning.
17th of February 1915, Assembly of Individual Assault Troops. I belong to the assault troop Friedrich. We spent the night in the Bas Merlus church with our assault packs.
Wilhelm and his regiment occupied a position near the main road of Saint-Dié to Santa Marie-aux-Mines, near the small town of Luce. French forces held the wooded, hilly terrain south of the road, opposite Luce. This narrow ridge was known as the Schusterberg and Hill 600. For months, the two forces had been engaged in small skirmishes, but on the morning of the 18th of February, German troops were ordered to prepare for an all-out assault on the French positions. This would be Wilhelm's first real taste of combat.
18th of February 1915. Assault Group Friedrich takes up position in the trench of the 3rd Battalion before the attack. At 11 o'clock in the morning, our artillery begins destructive fire. It is gradually moved from trench to trench. We stand ready with fixed bayonets and our hand bombs at the ready. Shortly beforehand, each smoker has to light his cigar or pipe so that he can light the fuses of the bombs during the attack. Eventually, the hand bombs are eagerly thrown and new ones are passed forwards. Everyone wants to hit the first French trench, in which the French soldiers had crowded together, driven there by the German barrage. The effect of our hand bombs was all the more terrible, to the point where some Frenchmen jumped out of the trench in desperation, over the parapet, because they couldn't stand it down there any longer. They quickly take cover behind a large tree trunk and open fire on our assault lines, but not for long, because soon the first French trenches are overrun, and those of the French occupants who are still alive are taken prisoner. As long as they surrender, all the others are annihilated.
By the end of the day, Hill 600 was in German hands, but casualties were high. Wilhelm's regiment alone had lost over 100 men, and 45 were listed as missing. Having taken the position, Wilhelm and his comrades' task was now to hold it against French counterattacks, which were sure to follow.
February 1915. As dawn was barely breaking, French detachments were already advancing to counterattack. We were not yet sufficiently aware of the blue-grey coats they were wearing, and some of us believed that they were our own comrades. We were reinforced in this opinion when the French called out to us in German, "Don't shoot your own troops." We alternated between orders to fire and cease fire until we finally realized that it was the French after all. But now we were not sparing with ammunition until all attempts by the French had been beaten off. Unfortunately, it also cost us quite a few victims. During the morning fighting, I had strayed a little too far to the right and got stuck with the 3rd Battalion, so I was reported missing during the first roll call of the 4th Company.
It had been a chastening experience for the young man, but as night fell, he had survived. As spring arrived and winter's grip loosened, the pace of the war intensified and casualty rates began to rise. For men like Wilhelm, once unaccustomed to death, its sights and smells had quickly become part of everyday life.
22nd of February 1915. A French shell hit cost us 2 dead and 7 wounded. Likewise, on the 25th of February, a direct hit cost us 4 dead and 6 wounded. From the 18th to the 25th of February, our company alone has 62 casualties, including 24 dead.
Shells had ravaged the earth, leaving it scarred and empty. No trees remained, only the debris of battle and the slowly decaying remains of the fallen.
On the 22nd of March 1915, as we are driving the sap forward, we find a dead Frenchman from the 18th of February. The corpse is completely frozen, and we can only drag the Frenchman into the trench in chunks, using a tent square, and then take the whole mess to the cemetery near La Barrière.
Dug in with only meters separating them, each side faced the constant peril of death.
On the 14th of April, the 3rd Battalion alongside ours lost another 20 men, including 7 dead. Similarly, on the 16th of April, the group to our left in the front trench lost several men. One Unteroffizier's leg was shot off, and he died while being bandaged. One man had several bullet fragments in both legs, so that he also died while being bandaged. Some comrades escaped with minor wounds. The Unteroffizier had just been on leave a few days earlier and got married there. There were also casualties from shells in Bas-Merlus. For the forward guard groups, it gets more and more sinister every day. Not only because of the constant disturbance caused by mines, rifle grenades, and catapult mines, but also because of the mine galleries, which both sides drive towards one another. You never know where it will blow up first.
In the spring of 1916, German High Command's gaze fell on Verden. Believing that a decisive victory here against the French could bring the Allies to the negotiating table, German forces started to prepare for what would be one of the bloodiest and the longest battle of the war. The offensive began in the early hours of the 21st of February, with German raiding parties first attacking French positions in the fortress belt around Verden. Despite strong artillery support, the advance was much slower than expected, and German casualties were high. With German forces in need of replacement, Wilhelm's unit, the 81st Landwehr Infantry Regiment, was rushed from the Vosges to Verden. Within hours of arriving, the newly promoted Unteroffizier Wilhelm Kurtz found himself preparing for an attack on the Bois de Maneul.
27th of February 1916. Advance across the Voivre plain begins. First to Mars-la-Tour. This is followed by the deployment towards the vast trench network in the direction of Pointeville-Riaville. From there, the march continues from Labbeville to Arville. We soon learn that the French have abandoned their positions on the Voivre plain and have retreated to the Côte-Lorraine. After marching through the completely battered Mézeray, we are in the area of the former fighting trenches. Huge shell craters indicate the fighting area. Bad roads lead through the French positions. Our men are finding it increasingly troublesome to maintain their footing.
Bois de Marneul fell to German forces on the 28th of February. Their next targets were the French-held towns of Marneul and Fresnes-en-Wavre. As with previous assaults, these were to be frontal attacks on fortified French positions.
At midday, we are ready to attack on the ridge, but have to wait for the destruction fire from the German artillery. The wait has become a bit long, until we finally get the order to break out of the forest at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The sun shines brightly on us as we break out of the forest, past the lime kiln on the left, across an open field, providing an excellent target for the French artillery on the Côte-Lorraine, especially as the French have the sun behind them. Accordingly, the French barrage, or rather destructive fire, is rather precise. Barrage after barrage, shell after shell, each one hitting right into our assault lines. There's only one way to escape here. At every pause in the firing, jump up, march, march, just forwards, towards the enemy, anything to escape the barrage. The terrain behind us as far back as Hill 259 is completely sealed off by French artillery. Our front line is getting thinner and thinner. Some of us, with the best will in the world, can't run any further due to exhaustion and fatigue. They just lie there and fall victim to the next French salvo of shells. You are always safest in the foremost line. While running forwards, I myself accidentally run into a water hole and suddenly find myself up to my waist in water, but I still have to get out of my wet clothes and socks. All packed and soaking wet, I scramble around and try to get forwards as quickly as possible before the next French shells hit. The situation gets more and more uncomfortable the closer we get to the French village of Audiomont. The French resistance here is becoming more and more alarming. A French machine gun at the upper window of a blue house is particularly troublesome. Although our front line is already thinned out, the French machine gun tears many more bloody gaps. In front of me and behind me, the earth is spraying up into the air, and all around me the impacts are hammering into the ground. My assault pack and my binoculars next to me have already taken a few hits. My neighbor ignores my repeated warning to duck down and flatten himself on the ground, and he's just looking around again. But no sooner has he lifted his head that he's hit. A short scream, blood spurts from his mouth and nose, shot in the head. A few rattling gasps, and he's finished. We can't go any further for the time being, so we have to duck down and stay as small as possible to avoid falling victim to the cursed French machine gunners. I scoop out the earth from under my belly as best I can and gradually become smaller and smaller. I push the dead comrade in front of me as cover and a bullet trap. I now have to hold out in this position until the protective darkness falls. From the heights behind Audiomont, new French divisions are still advancing to counterattack, but fortunately a machine gun on my left, the only one that can still be heard on our side, manages to clear up the French ranks thoroughly, so that they seem to have lost the desire to attack further. And finally, the protective darkness arrives. How nice to be able to get up and move your stiff bones again. But what a terrible picture around me. Everywhere the same cry, help, help, medics.
The attack had failed. German units suffered heavy losses and, in the face of massive French counterattacks, retreated to the wooded area north of Marneul. With that final action, German attacks on this section of the line came to a bloody end. In total, Wilhelm's unit lost over 1,000 men in the fighting.
There's a great shortage of men. There's also a great shortage of officers. In our 3rd company, we only have one young lieutenant named Schwager, who is also the company commander. On the 6th of March 1916, our company was given 102 replacements, and I had to take over a platoon as Unteroffizier. Every day, the French artillery fire claimed further victims, both in our position and on the approach routes, and even in the rest quarters.
The relentless French bombardments were a torment for some German soldiers, pushing them to the brink of endurance.
The French artillery fire, grenade attacks, and gas shelling right up to our rest quarters are not letting up. The Bavarian Ersatzdivision is said to have already lost over 50% of its strength. It's not getting much better here either, even though we've been moved back to Busy. The French heavy artillery is hitting here more often, and it's costing new victims every day. Tough are the night reports from my squad leaders, old, loyal, tried and tested Unteroffiziers who, due to these continuous losses, often fetch me to their place of work all discouraged and hopeless.
At the beginning of May, Wilhelm was allowed to go on leave, a rare occurrence in the German army. During his absence, he was promoted to the senior NCO rank of Offizierstellvertreter. Wilhelm's career was ascending rapidly, and by July his bravery had earned him the Iron Cross Second Class and the Hessian Bravery Medal. Despite the awards and promotions, Wilhelm's war was far from over. At the start of 1917, Wilhelm found himself in command of a trench mortar section, a Minenwerfer-Abteilung, and was billeted in the French town of Ascent, a few kilometers behind the front lines. There, not for the first time, he came into contact with French prisoners.
The French prisoners are also housed here. Their fate here is particularly bad and sad, as they have to be treated particularly badly as reprisals for the terrible treatment of our captured German comrades in France. The French have to spend day and night locked up in a wire pen in the open air on a damp meadow. They have to work for a few hours every day, digging and building new shelters for our camps. The rations are kept very meager and scarce. They are hardly given any eating utensils.
By February, Wilhelm and his comrades in the mortar section were back on the front line. There, once again, they found themselves facing the nerve-wracking reality of positional warfare, where every day brought the same relentless cycle of attacks and counterattacks, and the ever-present threat of a mine detonation.
On Monday, the 5th of February 1917, a French mine was detonated under our heavy Minenwerfer at the railway trench. The blasting crater is 31.5 meters in diameter and 12 meters deep. Busy patrol activity now begins again in our area. Besides us, our comrades bring in 26 captured Frenchmen, and on the 11th of February, they capture a French MG.
Nine days later, German positions were hit by another French mine.
14th of February, the front trench was completely leveled by French mines during a French bombardment on B1 and A4, and the access trenches and the ready position were also badly damaged. From the enemy trenches, a dense cloud of gas pushed low towards A1 and part of A2, a hissing sound that left no doubt about its dangerous nature. To add to the confusion of the suddenly launched gas attack, a deafening and violent barrage of gas shells, shrapnel, and mines of all calibers suddenly began. But by the time the waves of gas rolled down over the trenches and into the gullies in billowing mists, everyone had put on their masks for protection. Thanks to the gas masks, no casualties, although the French had intensified its effect by using 8,000 to 10,000 gas shells. 2 men were killed by the artillery fire. 1 man seriously wounded, 5 slightly.
In September, Wilhelm was promoted to Lieutenant. He was now in command of the Minenwerfer Abteilung of 2nd Battalion. Around this time, Wilhelm and his unit was withdrawn from the Verden sector and redeployed back in the Vosges Mountains. Unknown to the men, however, their journey would take them to the Sundgau, a relatively quiet front in Alsace, near the Swiss border.
On the 24th of November 1917, we observed a French undertaking in our neighborhood at Ammertsweiler. At 3:05 a.m., the French laid down a destructive fire. At 5:05 a.m., our infantry requested a barrage fire by means of red signals. The relay via Bernweiler went very smoothly. During the reciprocal firing, we observed explosions and detonations several times in succession at one point in the French trench, as well as a continuous going off of various flares in multiple colors and shapes, including a wonderful starburst.
Even at the quiet Sundgau front, danger was omnipresent.
Between 2 and 6:15 a.m., 175 shells were fired at the trenches from the north right, followed by a further 500 light caliber shells in the afternoon and into the night. The Heidweiler section had been largely spared from artillery fire until now, but this is now changing. 250 shells hit the forward area. Fire raids of about 30 shells on the valley ditch followed. Sundgau Graben 1 received 200 shells. From 6 o'clock in the evening, mines and heavy calibers of 15.5 and 22 centimeters were used against our front. Shrapnel balls patter through the trees of the Chateau Park, while at the same time the German artillery positions were being fired upon. The situation is looking grim. The projectiles howl thick and fast over Heidweiler. We sit in our tunnels and wait.
At 4:40 a.m. on the 21st of March 1918, 10,000 German artillery pieces and mortars opened fire on British positions. It was the biggest artillery barrage in the history of warfare. Behind the falling shells, waves of German stormtroopers swarmed towards British lines. Operation Michael had begun. For 16 long, bloody days, German forces launched round-the-clock assaults on British positions. Casualty rates on both sides were enormous, and thousands of British soldiers were taken prisoner. On the 5th of April, Operation Michael finally came to an end. Advancing 40 miles, the Germans had captured some 1,200 square miles of ground, the most taken since 1914. Despite this, the offensive was a strategic failure. Key targets remained in Allied hands, and the British Army was still intact. Despite Michael's failure, a second offensive, Operation Georgette, was launched against British lines in Flanders just 4 days later, on the 9th of April. This time, the target would be the strategically important French town of Hazebrouck. It would be Wilhelm's turn to face the British.
On Monday the 8th of April, all battalions pulled out of position. Everything is ready to leave. The mood of the force is anyone's guess. In that way, we make our way to our deployment area in front of Aubert. On Tuesday the 9th of April at 4:15 a.m., our artillery and mine preparation began a destructive barrage of unknown strength and unexpected effect. It sings and howls over our heads. We are in a very unfavorable position and have to suffer from heavy enemy artillery, which causes us heavy losses. The drum fire has been going on for 4 hours now, scaring the enemy to death and spoiling the excitement. At last, it's 8:45 a.m. and our assault teams are on the move. We follow first. Our path leads across the unfortunate position of the 1st Battalion, where the English shells are still crashing down. Soon the infantry passed this place of danger in a hurry. We, on the other hand, with our Minenwerfers, don't get through without an effort. In front of us lies a continuous field of craters, no spot untouched by destructive fire. There's hardly anything recognizable in front of the position. Only a few corpses of Tommies and Portuguese soldiers are lying there. The second English line is also completely leveled. There's hardly a trace of the wire obstacles. This makes it particularly difficult for our Minenwerfers to advance in the churned-up terrain, and as all comrades are loaded with a box of ammunition in addition to their assault packs and also have to pull the launchers themselves forward. At last we have reached our destination line, and now we get some help, namely from the first of the captured Tommies. They are stopped immediately and have to lend a hand and help us pull. This gives my men a chance to catch their breath. Our artillery also wreaked havoc in the enemy's third line and did a great job. Crater after crater, mostly of the larger size. We are presented with gruesome and interesting pictures here in the center of the English battlefield. Some seriously wounded lie in a crater waiting to be transported back. Is it still worth helping anyone? You help as best you can as you pass by. Many a tree branch or wooden post or whatever I can find is handed to one or the other as a support. And how grateful such a person is in his helplessness. How some faces stare back at us. That's death talking.
Germany's attempt to break through had exhausted its army, and the advantage now irreversibly passed to the Allies. On the 8th of August, British and Allied forces launched their own major offensive against German troops positioned in and around the French city of Amiens. This marked the beginning of the 100 Days Offensive. Wilhelm, positioned just outside the city, found himself once again in the crosshairs of Allied guns.
On the 8th of August, several dozen dead from shellfire and heavy gassing. English planes are vigorously dropping bombs. In the evening of Sunday, the 11th of August, maximum readiness is ordered, as a major English attack is expected. The garrison is immediately deployed in depth, and all companies are on standby. Our battalion is designated as the first battalion to sacrifice itself, so I have to stay in front with my Minenwerfer. Tense attention is now everywhere. Our artillery has also withdrawn behind the canal. Everything is ready for defense.
Over the next 100 days, the relentless Allied advance, fueled by the combined might of Britain, France, and the United States, battered German forces. Overwhelmed by the onslaught, exhausted German lines broke. By the end of the advance, British troops had punched a hole 15 miles deep into the German line south of the Somme. German commanders called it the Black Day of the German army. Defeat here marked an irreversible shift in the direction of the war and made Allied victory all but certain. In the days after, it is said that morale amongst German troops began to collapse as they undertook a series of hastily arranged retreats.
First of October 1918. The official retreat begins. At 7 o'clock in the morning, I relieve Lieutenant Riede in position on the fire control at Shaft 5. In the afternoon, the watchword "Autumn begins" is given, and all the remaining Minenwerfers with ammunition are immediately brought to the rear. On Wednesday, the 2nd of October, we reinstall our Minenwerfers. Massive explosions signaled our imminent retreat. The vibrations and detonations are monstrous. Beams and railway tracks fly around in the air. An officer's picket remains behind in each section of the regiment to await the English and, if possible, inflict damage on them. Over the next few days, tremendous marching efforts follow. And on the way, they encounter harrowing images. The villages have to be evacuated immediately, even by the civilians. And now the people lie on the road with their bundles of belongings. The further you get back, the more the villages are overcrowded with evacuees, and none of them know where to put their bundles in the rush. But taking everything with you is unthinkable. Everything had to be left to its fate. That is destruction. Despite the tremendous efforts, there's hardly any rest or opportunity to sleep for us. 11th of October. Lieutenant Reitz and Lieutenant Röth's platoons take up a position of readiness with 2 Minenwerfers each. I am barely in my position when the English barrage begins. A big English attack follows. On our left, the Englishman manages to break through and bypass our left wing. Everything moves forwards, so I have to withdraw my Minenwerfer. The Englishman gets very close to us. We immediately launch a counterattack with the help of a few tanks, and soon we have pushed the Tommy back to his starting position. Unfortunately, our machine guns run out of ammunition, and we are forced to retreat further. Luckily, I still have quite a lot of mine ammunition, and I can still inflict many a loss on the retreating Tommy with well-aimed shots. After firing 100 rounds, I quickly pull my Minenwerfer back into position to resume firing from there.
As October wore on, the fighting grew increasingly desperate. The German army, now a shadow of its former self, fought with grim determination, attempting to stall the relentless Allied advance and establish a stable defensive line.
14th of October 1918. After a heavy barrage of gas from the English artillery, I noticed that the English planes can drop their bombs undisturbed without any German aircraft being seen here at this time. Hundreds of dead Englishmen from the attack the day before still lie scattered in front of our lines. And it seems to us that the English have lost the desire to attack us, at least for today. Freezing and starving, we lie here defenseless in the cold, wet shell holes. There's hardly any food available. In addition to the incessant English artillery fire, you are plagued by the constant rain. These are the worst hours I've experienced in the war so far. Drum fire, gassing, rain and cold. Even the strongest nerves can't stand it. The subsequent English attacks sometimes go so far that it is often only a question of minutes or even seconds who will keep the upper hand and who will be taken prisoner by the other. 16th of October, the barrage continues unabated. Like animals, we are writhing around in the craters in the ground. The situation looks increasingly bleak and hopeless for us. The English artillery occasionally sends very heavy calibers into our infantry lines for a change. 17th of October, endless drum fire, gassing and infantry battles in the familiar variety. Today my Vizefeldwebel-Möpfner returns from leave, and I can finally be relieved for a short time. In a sheltered, bombed-out cellar in Aspe, I can dry off again, warm up and get a good night's sleep. And the following night we continue back to Montchaud under heavy enemy fire. Here we only find cold, empty rooms and cellars. Despite the cold and restlessness, we are simply overcome by sleep, and how good it is to rest on the bare, cold earth. The food arrives so late in the evening that we save it for the next day. Unfortunately, the beautiful sauerkraut with the meat is completely spoiled the next morning. Only the couple of potatoes have to satisfy our hunger. Changing clothes and laundry is completely out of the question here, as the baggage is so far behind that there is no chance of it getting here. So you pass the time by catching lice. One village after another falls victim to destruction, especially by the English artillery. Unfortunately, the bad weather and the vermin make the couple of hours of rest even more miserable. On Monday the 21st of October, I had hardly chosen suitable places in the Hermann position when we were alerted to another counterattack. The battalion had to advance, and I had to bring up 4 Minenwerfers again. We can observe the advancing English columns in closed formation very well as the advancing English artillery with their ammunition columns accompanied by the English officers on horseback. They can go their way undisturbed without being bothered by our artillery. Without binoculars, we can see how the English are occupying the entire ridge to our right. Anger and despair overwhelm you when you have to watch something like this without doing anything. With only a couple of men and few weapons, one has to let all this happen with impunity. Wednesday the 23rd of October. Again and again, the British infantry set off on another assault, but each time we managed to hold off the English attack or throw them back. However, it is becoming increasingly difficult for me to keep my few men under control in this situation, especially as the barrage is getting stronger and stronger. It makes them want to run away. The casualties are mounting and the ranks are thinning. The infantry companies only have 7 to 20 men left.
Under the relentless shelling, Wilhelm and the remnants of his regiment were pulled back from the front lines on the 25th of October. In the following days, they retreated into Belgium, seeking respite from the overwhelming Allied onslaught. The once proud regiment, now a battered and depleted force. While whispers of unrest back home had occasionally reached the front, it was only now that Wilhelm became truly aware of the growing political unrest stirring in Germany.
3rd of November 1918. We are already in Belgian territory. You can see very clearly that the Belgians are much cleaner, tidier, and much more obliging. Here we hear the first conversations leaking out, as if things were no longer quite right at home, and various elements at home no longer wanted to participate in it all.
By the start of November 1918, the German army was crumbling under the relentless pressure of Allied attacks. The once formidable forces that had held out for over 4 years were now exhausted, depleted, and demoralized. Back in Germany, the situation was equally dire. The war-ravaged economy teetered on the brink of collapse, with food and fuel in critically short supply. By the end of the year, cold and hunger would claim the lives of nearly 300,000 German civilians. On November the 3rd, German sailors mutinied at the naval base in Kiel, sparking rebellions across the country. Facing mounting pressure from his own government, Kaiser Wilhelm II reluctantly abdicated his throne. With a collapsing front and a nation in revolt, the German government was forced to seek an immediate end to the war. On the 6th of November, a delegation led by Matthias Erzberger, the Vice-Chancellor of Germany, departed for France to negotiate surrender terms with the Allies. The news of the Kaiser's abdication, along with the ongoing armistice negotiations, reached Wilhelm and his comrades on the 10th of November.
10th of November, Sunday. At noon the forces are assembled, and the regimental commander reads out the sad news that His Majesty the Emperor has abdicated and that revolt has broken out in Germany. The following 3 decrees make us realize the sad state of affairs in our fatherland and indicate that negotiations with the enemy are being accelerated.
The Allied powers were in no mood for compromise. The armistice terms presented to the German delegation were harsh. Germany had to accept responsibility for the war. It was to be completely disarmed, and portions of its territory would be occupied indefinitely, with some regions, like Alsace-Lorraine, lost forever. But with no alternative, and desperate to end the slaughter, the German delegation reluctantly agreed to all of the Allies' terms. News of the impending ceasefire reached Wilhelm in the early hours of that fateful day. Though the killing would be permitted to continue for a little longer, the end was finally in sight.
Monday, the 11th of November, 1918. During the night, the sound of the passing troops is constantly heard. Our regiment is once again the rear guard in this section. 1 battalion is in position in front. Finally, around 9 o'clock in the morning, the ceasefire is announced. At 11 o'clock, in their exuberance, English airmen once again bombard us and spray our road with machine guns. In the afternoon, I take another walk to Edingen, where I had been hospitalized a few weeks ago. How the cityscape has changed here in the last few days. It looks desolate and sad. The picture on the street was no less sad. Here I noticed young German soldiers in particular. They belonged to the 8th Infantry Division. In the morning they had completely looted a train with provisions and clothing at the railway station. Food was destroyed and the clothes were sold to the civilian population for pennies. Another sad picture remains unforgettable to me. German soldiers walking arm in arm with Belgian civilians through the streets, all heavily drunk. Still complete silence, a deep dejection, even indignation about the troops, especially those back home, is noticeable. And again we ask ourselves the angry question, have we endured the greatest dangers and efforts for more than 4 years to find such conditions at home, in the homeland that we have protected for so long with our lives and our health?
The following day, German forces began withdrawing from their most forward positions, falling back to reserve lines to begin the initial stages of demobilization. For exhausted soldiers like Wilhelm, this meant a long journey through the devastated battlefields of Europe, returning to a Germany that many didn't recognize.
Tuesday the 12th of November, 8 o'clock in the morning. The regiment to Leenbeek. Good march and clear weather. The further we get into the rearward position, the more saddened we become by the sight of the disgraceful behavior of the German pigs behind the lines. Halle and Brussels are mentioned to be particularly bad. There, the hordes of pigs roamed the local streets like gangs of robbers, looting and plundering wherever and however they could. Shoulder boards and badges were torn off the officers' uniforms there. The entire Army High Command 6 has submitted to the Soldiers' Council in Brussels. The astonishment of our men, who are still marching in perfect order and discipline, is growing ever greater. All those who have recently lived through such difficult days are, without exception, of the opinion that they will not tolerate such wretched conditions in the sad fatherland. Nobody will put up with it.
Finally, on the 18th of November, after 3 days marching, Wilhelm and his men arrived back in Germany, entering the historic cathedral city of Cologne. It was under the shadow of the cathedral's spires that Wilhelm and his unit received their final orders before beginning the last leg of their journey back home to face whatever future awaited them.
Here all the houses are lavishly decorated and festooned. Pretty girls and small children share flowers, cigarettes and gifts of love one last time. A marvelous welcome for us with cheers and hurrahs. Only in one house can you see a red flag. Under another, there are a couple of small red flags in the window. Otherwise, only the old national colors are waving proudly towards us, and there is little to see of the new red. Under the ringing of all the cathedral and church bells, our detachments march past as the last German forces in front of the heads of the authorities and the administration who have lined up on the cathedral steps. An unforgettable moment. We German soldiers leave Cologne, and the first English occupying soldiers follow right behind us. We march on into the darkness.
By 1929, Wilhelm was 42 years old, father to a 14-year-old daughter, and Germany was a liberal democracy. Marked by hyperinflation, political extremism, and international isolation, the early post-war years had been turbulent. But for nearly 5 years, from 1925, the country flowered, and Germany, under the Weimar government, prospered. In October 1929, that all came crashing down once again with the Great Depression. Overnight, millions of Germans, including Wilhelm, lost their savings and jobs in what was the worst economic collapse in modern history. With parliamentary elections on the horizon, the Republic was in disarray. Sensing an opportunity, it was at this moment that another veteran of the Great War and the leader of a nationalist paramilitary group took his chance. For years, Hitler and the National Socialists had been a fringe political group with limited national appeal. In the 1928 elections, they had won just 2.6% of the vote. But against a backdrop of social unrest, mass unemployment, and disdain for the perceived failings of the Weimar government, Hitler's message of national renewal suddenly resonated with a disillusioned population. The coming election would mark a pivotal turning point in Germany's history. On the morning of the 14th of September 1930, Wilhelm and millions of his fellow countrymen headed to the polls. The results sent shockwaves through the political establishment. Hitler's party had secured 18.3% of the vote. In total, over 6 million Germans had voted for the National Socialists. They were now the second biggest political party in the country and could no longer be ignored. By 1934, the Nazi Party consisted of nearly 5 million members, and Wilhelm was one of them. Hitler, having been appointed to the role of Chancellor by the ailing Hindenburg in 1933, had wasted no time in tightening his grip on power, immediately banning all other political parties whilst introducing the Enabling Act, a law granting him the authority to legislate independently of the Reichstag. The last flickers of democracy were extinguished with Hindenburg's death in 1934. On the 19th of August, Hitler declared himself combined president, chancellor, and head of the army. His transformation into Germany's supreme leader was complete. A chilling new chorus reverberated through the streets of German towns and cities. By the beginning of 1935, Wilhelm was still working as a teacher and had been a member of the party for 2 years. As part of a radical overhaul of government institutions, the National Socialists had begun a systematic program of Nazification. No element of German society was to be left untouched, including schools. Teachers, now under the authority of the Third Reich, were expected to join the National Socialist Teachers League and swear allegiance to Hitler. Curriculums were rewritten to reflect Nazi ideology, and educators like Wilhelm were charged with indoctrinating their students with unwavering obedience to the Führer. To achieve this, teachers like Wilhelm were required to attend training camps, where they were immersed in Nazi ideology and instructed on how to incorporate it into their lessons. In a letter written on the 14th of September 1935, Wilhelm apologized for arriving late and expressed his gratitude to the board for his time at one such camp.
Report by the vocational school teacher Wilhelm Kurtz in Neu-Isenburg on the 26th seminar at the NSLB training camp in Mainz from the 2nd to the 14th of September 1935. If my participation in the training camp in Mainz took place at such a late date, I would like to say at the outset that this is not my fault, because I had already registered with my colleagues at the vocational school in Neu-Isenburg in the first survey after the opening of the camp. This was followed by 2 more registrations on my part, which were again not taken into account. In making this comment in advance, I would like to guard against the suspicion that I am also one of those colleagues who must now be ordered to participate. As far as the outcome of the training camp is concerned, I can unreservedly endorse the judgment of my other colleagues who have all been there and always come back full of enthusiasm and who still have fond memories of a wonderful time. It is certainly an excellent opportunity to familiarize German educators more and more with the will of National Socialist Germany. and to allow every educator to immerse themselves more and more deeply in National Socialist thought so that they can freely and unhesitatingly stand before the youth of the Third Reich at any time in order to help shape and educate them in the spirit and according to the will of our great Führer Adolf Hitler.
These educational camps were designed with a singular purpose: to solidify the Nazi worldview as the bedrock of all learning. Children as young as 5 were indoctrinated through songs and stories, and membership in the Hitler Youth became compulsory for all German boys over the age of 10. The radicalization of Germany's youth was underway, and Wilhelm would play an active participant.
The flag raising and hoisting in ceremony with the appropriate hearty motto reminded us anew every day that there can only be one symbol under which our life and work in the new Germany can take place.
On the 15th of September, just one day after Wilhelm had sent his letter to the school board, the Nazi regime announced 2 new laws: the Reich Citizenship Law and the Law for the Protection of German Blood and German Honor. The Nuremberg Laws, as they became infamously known, marked a pivotal, deadly moment in Hitler's reign. For years, hatred and discrimination against Jews and other minority groups had been escalating. Now, Hitler had laid the legal framework to systematically strip these people of their rights and humanity. By the end of 1939, Germany was once again at war. Having already seized Austria and Czechoslovakia the previous year, Hitler's thirst for conquest remained unsatisfied, and he now turned his attentions towards Poland. On the 1st of September, in coordination with the Soviets, Hitler's invasion of Poland began. In response, Britain and France declared war on Germany. The Second World War had begun. Still a reservist, but too old to serve in the armed forces, Wilhelm could only watch on as the world plunged once again into war. Unable to take part in the fighting, he would instead busy himself with his duties as a Blockwart, a resident informer tasked with the political supervision of his neighbors. After 6 years of bloody conflict, the war had come to an end. 60 million people had perished in the fighting. Hitler was dead, and Germany lay in ruins. In those final months, Wilhelm found himself in command of a Volkssturm company, a small force put together from veterans of the Great War and members of the Hitler Youth. Mostly unarmed, the men did their best to avoid all contact with advancing Allied troops. Wilhelm was eventually captured by US forces near Meiningen, along with hundreds of other members of the Volkssturm, and imprisoned. As a former party member, he was forced to complete labor service at a sawmill. Barred from teaching, he later looked for agricultural work with his sister, and then worked in a lamp factory. The Allies, recognizing that Nazism had first sprung from Germany's humiliating defeat 27 years earlier, set out a plan of denazification. Supporters of the Nazi government would be held accountable for their crimes. All physical traces of Nazism were to be destroyed, and its citizens were to be confronted with the full scope of Nazi crimes. As an immediate step, Germans who held government offices under the Nazis lost their jobs. The Nazi Party was banned, and advocating its ideas was punishable by death. The swastika and other party symbols were removed from public view. All Germans had to fill out a questionnaire about their involvement in Nazi organizations, and ex-members would need to present themselves at hastily set-up boards to determine what role, if any, they'd play in the future shaping of their country. It wasn't long before Wilhelm found himself facing the scrutiny of one such board.
Wilhelm Kurtz, vocational school teacher, 21st of July 1946. Subject, denazification. I hereby authorize myself to submit the following to the Judicial Review Board in my defense. Reasons for joining. In the belief that with the NSDAP coming to power, Germany would rise rapidly, I followed the request of my director Hill and signed the registration form, although I had never before been politically active or involved. I wanted to avoid any harassment by the NSDAP because 1. I had the Jewish physician Dr. Minkel as my family doctor. 2. I was a member of the Consumer Association and the Ceres Coal Fund, which were subsequently no longer subsidized by the Nazis in their old form. 3. I always maintained a good comradely relationship with the two Jewish teachers Jacobi and Heitung. In autumn 1936, my colleague Reise, who worked for the local branch of the party, asked me to collect the fees in a block in Waldstraße for him, as he was very overloaded with work. As a favor, I took on this work for him, especially as there were 4 assistants there for me to collect. And so I became Blockleiter. Repulsed by the actions against the Jews and similar machinations, I had made repeated attempts in recent years to get rid of this job, but my cell leader, Fiedebeng, kept telling me that it wasn't possible as long as no one else was doing the work. I refused to take on any further service at the party. As I was on the preparatory courses for tradesmen, I always refused to persuade my wife to join the Nazi organization, and she also stayed away from all party associations until the end.
The Hessian State Ministry had filed a lawsuit against him, classifying him as a Class II incriminated person, an activist who had actively supported the violent Nazi regime. If found guilty, the potential consequences were severe. He would be forbidden from resuming his work as a teacher, disqualified from holding any positions in public office, and could face the very real prospect of compulsory public labor service and the confiscation of all his personal assets. On the 2nd of October 1947, Wilhelm received the initial verdict.
The 2nd of October, 1947. I file a lawsuit against Wilhelm Kurtz, vocational school teacher. Reason: states that he was a member of the NSDAP from 1933 to 1945 and worked here as a Blockleiter from 1936 to 1945. He was also a member of the NSV in the Reichskolonialbund and in the NSRKB, where he was the social warden. According to the investigations, he was also a member of the SA Reserve II. As a troop leader, he was on the NSRKB's Führer Advisory Council, in the NSLB District Chairman for School Air Raid Protection, and Air Raid Protection Teacher, Untergruppenführer in the Reichsluftschutzbund. No other charges have been identified. It must be assumed that the person concerned promoted the National Socialist tyranny through his activities, and is therefore jointly responsible for the consequences of these methods of violence. Kurtz must be counted among the intellectual co-leaders who, although they did not become visibly active, were nonetheless complicit to the same extent as the actual activist.
In response, Wilhelm fought to clear his name, enlisting character witnesses to support his claims. They testified to his opposition to Nazi ideology, his involvement in the church, his support for critics of the regime, and his efforts to protect his men from harm during the Volkssturm deployment. He argued that his actions demonstrated a clear distance from the Nazi Party's violent agenda. Wilhelm's livelihood and reputation hung in the balance. It would take nearly 2 years until the state prosecutor formulated the final verdict.
The person concerned had been working as a teacher since 1908. He had been working at the vocational school in Neu-Isenburg since 1920. The head of this school urged the teaching staff under his command to join the NSDAP as members. The testimony of the witnesses Werner, Dr. Dietz, Cheb, and Gross proved that the person concerned was tolerant towards those with different political views. In political discussions, they were able to openly express their rejection of National Socialist policies without having to fear being reported by the person concerned. The public prosecutor's office recognized that the person concerned had only marginally supported National Socialism. Judgment: the person concerned is a Group 4 follower. In accordance with Article 12, the following penalties are imposed on him. He must make a one-off special contribution to a restitution fund in the amount of 600 Reichsmarks. The costs of the proceedings shall be borne by the person concerned.
Wilhelm was cleared. After paying the fine, he would be free to return to his profession and fully reintegrate back into German society. In the end, the results of denazification were modest. Of the 13 million Germans who filled out the questionnaire in the American zone, only 1,654 were convicted as major offenders. Officially, denazification in the Federal Republic of Germany ended in December 1950 by resolution of the Bundestag. Wilhelm died, aged 94 years old, on the 23rd of May, 1982. He was survived by his wife and children.